Thank you everyone for being here today to Mended Hearts Advocacy 101 webinar training. I'm Mandy Sankler. I'm your Director of Programs and Communications, and it's my absolute pleasure to welcome you to the training today and to introduce you to our new advocacy relations team, Troutman Pepper Strategies. And in a moment, they're going to introduce themselves and begin the training. But before they do, I just wanted to mention that because this is a meeting mode, you will be able to unmute yourself and ask questions throughout the training. We want this to be interactive. And so you can use the raised hand feature, or you can just chat your questions into the chat box and we'll go from there. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Lindsay. And thank you, Lindsay.
Of course. Yes. And Brian, if you could load up the slides for us to just get everybody acquainted with what we're going to discuss today. Mandy, thank you so much for introducing us to your great group of advocates and champions here. It has been our pleasure to get to know you. We're very new to the Mended Hearts team, but we're not new to the world of advocacy. Brian, if you could skip to the next slide, that'd be great. I'll start out by introducing ourselves. So my name is Lindsay Austin. I am the principal at Troutman Pepper Strategies, a government relations division of our nationwide law firm. If you're familiar, Troutman Pepper is an AmLaw 100 law firm, but we are a subsidiary that provide government relations and advocacy services. We do specialize in a lot of public health, nonprofit, healthcare related work. I, in particular, my background is working on Capitol Hill and definitely managed a large portfolio, including healthcare. My colleagues here today, Chris Baxter, who's the senior manager with Troutman Pepper Strategies, as well as Ryan Diffley, also senior manager. All of us worked on Capitol Hill. Ryan and I worked on the House side for many years. Chris worked on the Senate side, but I've been with Troutman and managing client work and advocacy work for around 14 years, in the private sector. So we're coming to you with background and experience, especially on the side of being those staffers that are working for members of Congress and hearing from folks like yourself. And so I know everybody's very used to Zoom and these being presentation style, but we really want to make this very informal. Like, this is a family conversation. We're sitting around the table having a discussion about what it means to exercise your ability to advocate on issues you care about, especially related to heart health and your family's health. And so our purpose is to be able to do that for you today and utilize our expertise and consider this a training module for those who have never experienced this before. And then some of you might be very familiar. So we'll go on to the next slide. So this is our chance I know some people are off screen. So this is your chance to give us a show of hands or raise your hand in the chat or drop your name in the chat. If you've ever advocated before, have you been to Washington? Have you met with your members of Congress to discuss issues related to either your heart health or generally? Have you ever done any advocacy work in Washington or at the state and local level? I would love to get a feel for who's around the room that has done that before. We able to see hands or any notes in the chat?
I see Judson got his hand up.
Yeah.
Okay. I see John. Okay, wonderful. That's great. All right. Well, so we have a rough, small group of folks that have done it before, which makes our job a lot more fun today because we're going to be telling you stuff that you may never heard of. And for some of those who have done this before, this is going to be great because I'd love for you to thank you, Nova. I see in the chat. We want it to be very conversational because you may feel this may feel completely foreign to you. But at the same time, we want you to be so comfortable with this work. It's the core of democracy to be able to lobby and advocate to your members of Congress about issues that matter to you. So it's good to see we have a handful of folks that have done advocacy work before. And so I think, Judson, I'm not going to pick on you, but if you want to chime in, what do you think when you think of advocacy? And then I'd like to ask somebody who hasn't advocated before, if anybody's bold enough to chime in. If not,
Sure.
we can keep it easy.
I mean, I think it's really, Lindsay, it's a great question. It means a lot of different things to a lot of different people probably, but for me, it means to share my story and help it to leverage a particular ask, whatever it's funding for a particular cause like heart disease or stroke to, educating advocating, you're helping to educate others. You're sharing your story, but also educating them at the same time in hopes of gaining their interest and trust in what you're sharing or selling.
Excellent. You could teach this course. I know, because that's really the crux of it. It is absolutely that. It is a way to educate people because of how much information members of Congress, their staff, policymakers are inundated every day. We'll get a little bit more into this in the technical aspects of how you lobby, what you talk about. But I guess for those who have never lobbied before, I'd love for somebody to raise their hand or pipe in and say, if you've never done it before, what's your view or impression of advocacy? Any takers?
Bob has his hand raised. I'm not sure if he's a new advocate. Bob, I think you've been on the Hill before with us.
Well, he can, welcome to chime in.
I've been on twice. I did once in person and I did once on the Zoom call. And it was rather funny. In person, they asked us to go in teams of 2. And the guy who went with me was 6'4", about 300 pounds. I'm 5'3", and about 140 pounds. And when I walked into Congressman Larson's office in Connecticut, the woman looked at the 2 of us and I said, "This is my bodyguard."
That's great. Well, and you were able to be representative of all walks of life that need to come in and talk about these issues. So thanks for presenting the diversity there with your height. That's fantastic. Hopefully we get to meet you in person and we can have that similar experience. So thank you, Robert. And again, thank you, Judson, for chiming in. Hopefully that was a decent icebreaker to get everyone comfortable. We're a friendly group. We love doing this work. We have a lot of fun going to Capitol Hill. We have a lot of fun communicating with our clients and advocates like yourself in order to make sure you're getting your best opportunities possible. So Ryan, next slide, please.
Lindsay, real quick, it looks like John has maybe a question or would like to say something as well.
Of course. Yes, please. Pipe in.
All right, so advocacy is protecting vulnerable populations. I was a special education teacher for 37 years, so I've had some experience in advocacy, but my reason for coming today is to learn more because I'm just as a heart failure patient, I'm disgusted by the lack of cardiac rehabilitation in New York City.
Great.
Taking notes, John. Thank you. Actually, that really does hit to the core of the passion behind these issues and the reason you guys are here. It's a lot of fun, but it's also very serious. And it is a way for you to advocate for not just yourself, but for those other vulnerable individuals that have similar stories. So would love to get into that with you. We're taking some notes. So if we pause for a second, we just want to get to know you this way. And you both, all 3 of you that chimed in, offered different perspectives about what it means. And it really is in the eye of the beholder as you become and you start to foster your advocacy role with Mended Hearts or on your own. Okay, so if there's no more comments on the show of hands slide, we'll move on to the next.
We have one other, I think, John
Okay,
Vosper.
yeah, great. I love it. Bring it on.
Coming on 7 years post-heart transplant. It was July 23rd, 2017. And I was told at the time when the senior linkage line said that Medicare would cover one of my anti-rejection meds. Medicare said because I wasn't on Medicare when I had the transplant, they wouldn't cover it. So I wrote letters to Amy Klobuchar and Tina Smith and to Mended Hearts. And the only response I got was from Amy Klobuchar saying, "Look to see what I'm doing." Nothing from anybody, which really irritated the heck out of me because I sold insurance for a while. And I thought that pre-existing conditions weren't allowed. And if I'd been on Medicare prior to the transplant, they would have covered it. When I got my first dose, they were sending me a bill for $6,000 for a month's supply.
Wow. Well, and that specific anecdote is exactly what we want to talk about today, and how to better hone in on your message. Not that you did a thing wrong. You did absolutely the right thing by reaching out to your representatives and to your senators. And this is a huge part of what we want to do to help you get the response you need and deserve, and also help find ways that might be alternative to just sending letters or submitting something through websites. We have a couple of options that we'll discuss today with my colleagues, as again, reminding you, we were on the other side of the table when folks like yourself, John and Robert, and others who've advocated before, hearing these messages and finding ways to respond, even if it can't be something fixed overnight. You deserve a response, and you deserve a thoughtful one that will discuss how these policies move forward. And I think that's going to be a core issue for Mended Hearts, is to look at the policies and how it impacts all of its advocates. So I think we should go ahead and move on just for the sake of time, but we'll have time at the end for Q&A. So please write your questions down, put them in the chat. If you want to talk a little bit more about your experience. So at this stage, you know, we already sort of laid this out for you, but we wanted to walk through really the advocacy training objective and why we're here today. We really want to provide Mended Hearts advocacy champions, so that's you guys, with the tools and messaging needed to engage with these members of Congress. That's your representatives and your senators, in this case at the federal level. We will eventually get into how you can communicate the state level, but a lot of the policy impacting, you know, heart health is at the federal level. So we want to make sure you have these tools to engage with Congress to promote impactful heart health initiatives and policies. And then we do it as a unit. The stronger we are, the strong as our combined efforts can be. If there are one-off issues, that's fine. But when we really want to tackle an issue, the more, the better. That is definitely something that we've learned being staffers and having advocated on behalf of organizations like yourself. So with that, I'm going to hand over to the next, to my teammate here. I think Chris is the next slide.
Ryan. I am actually.
Okay.
All
right.
So
Take it
I'm
away.
Ryan Diffley with Troutman Pepper. I have 8 years experience working on the Hill as a Hill staffer. And so my job while on the Hill was to meet with folks such as yourselves who wanted to discuss, you know, a specific issue, concern, or bring, you know, life stories to us to you know, hopefully provide some sort of change in legislation to better, you know, better your situation and the situation of your loved ones. And so what we've sort of discussed already is, you know, why is advocacy important? And I think a lot of you had great stories that you brought to the table so far to explain what advocacy has meant to you and what you think of when you hear the word advocacy. That, you know, we can go through the list and kind of have a discussion about why advocacy is actually truly important. And, you know, first one is it's part of the democracy that we live in. You have a right to be heard by the representatives that you elect, and you have the right to raise your concerns and your issues with them. And they should be listening to those, since you are, you know, at the end of the day, the voter. The others are staff and members on the Hill are under-resourced and understaffed. You bring the experiences, the knowledge, you know, the stories that help craft legislation that betters your lives, but also makes, you know, important changes to the legislation that, you know, without those stories, members might not be able to implement. You know, sorry, I'm just trying to get my notes straight here. I think another part of why advocacy is important is outside the Hill and moving towards the agency and rulemaking. And so after policy is signed into law, the agencies are required to do a rulemaking period. And during that time, there's open comments. And so that provides you an opportunity to provide feedback on how you believe the rule should be implemented. And that honestly has a large impact on the day-to-day of how those laws are implemented. And so that is another crucial part of advocacy, is going to the agencies and making your voice heard there as well. And then I think most importantly is just making sure that you as an advocate are making the changes necessary for members to implement the policies that benefit you the most. Lindsay or Chris, do you have anything else on that?
No, I think that was a wonderful outline, Ryan, and having experienced it, but at the same time, learn from it, because now you're on the other side of the table from being a staffer And it is amazing to learn the best practices and the way to address these issues, but being understanding of who you're talking to. It really does matter. So sometimes it might feel like you're talking to a wall, but if you can put yourself in the shoes of the person across from you, there's a very good chance that that staff or that member of Congress had a family member impacted by a similar health-related issue. So I think it's always great to find that vulnerable connection with whoever it is you're meeting with, whether they're the most junior staffer or the most senior senator or the president of the United States. Everybody's been impacted by these health concerns. So I was about to type in really quickly for the question about from Jennifer related to folks with money having a better chance of getting legislators' ears. I definitely understand, and many identify with that. But it's really about maximizing resources. You guys are resources. So your efforts, your words are just as good as money when it comes to communicating to members of Congress. The more you are in these numbers, the more clear you are about your desires and needs. And that's what we're here for, is to help you better hone in on the message and get you guys primed up to be ready to advocate.
And
But
I'll maybe add a little bit more there, Lindsay. As a staffer on the Hill, there is a pretty clear line between campaign work and donations and fundraising and being a professional staff member. And so my 8 years on the Hill, I don't know who donated to my bosses during that time. I treated, staff are professionals. They treat each person coming through that door, whether they're constituents or people who are there to speak on behalf of constituents of theirs, in a professional manner. And so I think, I have those conversations with family as well. Money is in the game, but showing up, showing face, sharing your experiences is, I think, the most important thing anyone can do.
thank you, Ryan.
Yeah, it's really easy and fun too, I might add.
It is fun.
We say this all the time when we set up fly-ins and do events for clients and things like that, where we're taking them around to message their activity. It's really hard work ahead of it. This is part of it, training and getting the materials and doing all that. But once you're on the Hill, you get a rush. It's so exciting. You're there with your peers. It really is one of the best parts of the job. And honestly, I'm from Georgia, and the only way that I could have tolerated 20 years in DC doing this on the Hill and, from the lobbying side and advocacy side is for this type of work, is to be able to make a difference and really connect on the human level. So I don't mean to get too deep about it, but this is important. And this is where we really want to make sure we reinforce that. So with that, I'm going to hand it to Chris to get into the nuts and bolts about some of the first steps on lobbying and advocating on specific issues. So Chris.
Yeah, thanks, Lindsay. The next couple of slides, like Lindsay just said, really are meant to give you a step-by-step process for how to advocate. So the first part of any sort of advocacy campaign is determining which legislation, which type of policy you really want to be communicating with offices. So for the purposes of this training, we're not necessarily telling our advocates to push any particular legislation, but we did want to use the Safe Step Act as an example to demonstrate the core and key pieces of information that you should be looking for when you're advocating. So the first step that I usually recommend to people when they're advocating is going to congress.gov. That can give you a lot of information. It'll tell you what the status of your bill is. It'll tell you if any congressional committees have held hearings or markups on the bill. It'll tell you who the co-sponsors are. And in most cases, it'll give you summaries of the bill, which can also be really helpful for when you are, crafting your message later in this process. And then I also always recommend, if you do know the sponsor of a particular bill that you're advocating for, go to their webpage. 9 times out of 10, probably 99 times out of 100, they're going to have some sort of press release on the bill that can give you better talking points than what might be on, the congress.gov website. So congress.gov is probably the first step, but, again, going to those members' web pages is probably the second step that I say. So, just kind of using this as an example to set the table for what we're going to be talking about for the rest of the conversation. Looking at this webpage, I know the picture is probably really hard for a lot of you to see on the screen, but the Safe Step Act. It was introduced earlier this year and hasn't seen any activity in Congress. So when we're talking to members of Congress about this bill, we want to say, hey, this hasn't gone anywhere. What can you do to potentially push activity in, say the House Energy and Commerce Committee, since that's where this bill sits. We also know from Congress.gov that this bill has 220 bipartisan co-sponsors. That is not normal, actually. That is an incredibly high number. But the reason why that's important is because you need to know when you're talking to a congressional office if that member of Congress has already signed on to support this bill, because that'll obviously help craft your message. So, if they're already signed on, great. It might just be a, hey, thank you for supporting. Let us know how we can be a resource. If they're not a co-sponsor, it's, hey, can you consider supporting this bill? Educate the staff on what the policy is, and then urge the member to vote yes when it does come up for a vote in Congress or on the House floor. So I'll also point out this bill does have a CRS summary at the bottom, so it's a great resource to give you an idea of what that bill actually does. Ryan, I think we're ready for the next slide unless anybody has any questions.
That's a tough one. I'll chime in. No need to go too deep into it, but that can be the most intimidating part of all of this, is trying to parcel through legislative text and understand what it means. And are you going to pick the right bill? Are you going to articulate the right message? A lot of what we do will help you define that. And remember, you're talking to staff and members of Congress who also like to have things really, I don't want to say dumbed down, but simplified so they can better understand. And guess what? Your stories are the best way to understand why legislation matters. And also, when you see Chris mention that there's not been a lot of activity, the way that you can produce activity around legislation is by promoting it and advocating for it. So that's a huge purpose as to why we're even doing this. When we think about the objective is to make a change and actually move legislation and good policy. So
we probably should have noted, I think these slides will be shared with you at the end of the presentation. Mandy, correct me if I'm wrong there, but I think a lot of what we're trying to present, and Ryan, if you could maybe just go back to the last slide, sorry. A lot of what we're trying to represent is just to act as a checklist on a very simple checklist on what information you might need when you're going to an office. So what the status of the bill is, if your member is already a co-sponsor, a short description, and then that could hopefully, craft your objective, right? So it's just really meant to be a step-by-step process that we're trying to lay out here. So sorry, just wanted to clarify that. And Ryan, you can go ahead.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, so now that you've done your research and, hopefully are comfortable with sharing the message of why the legislation is important, why you're there to meet with them, you've got that all lined up. You need to figure out who you're actually supposed to meet with, who your representative is. And so it seems, probably Judson, you seem as though you probably know who your representative is, and maybe even have them on speed dial. But I'm sure some of you may not even know who your representative is and where you might be able to find that information. And so it's actually very simple. For the House, you can go to house.gov, and we have the screenshot here on the screen. And there's a zip code finder up in the top right here where you can put your zip code in. If your zip code splits a member, it'll take you to a page asking for your specific address, and then it'll provide your member of Congress, and it'll list their webpage, their official webpage that you can go on to. The same thing for the Senate, senate.gov. Go to senate.gov. It'll show you by state who your senator is. And then their websites will have their contact information. On those websites, there's usually a submission form where you can just leave a comment for them. You will also be able to find their email address, their office locations and hours, as well as phone numbers for those offices. And so typically senators' offices, since they represent the whole state, they'll have, 5, 6, 7, depending how large your state is, they'll have offices around the state. Your House representative, depending on how large their district is, will have 1 to 2 offices in the district. And so that information will be listed on their official webpage. Any questions that y'all might have on that? Good. And so why are we doing this call now? Um, Many of y'all might not, understand the scheduling of how the House and the Senate work. August recess or the August district work period is traditionally when members, both the House and Senate, are in recess and they go back to their districts, back to their states, and take meetings with constituents and different groups, to have one-on-one sessions with them to hear them out. And it's a good opportunity for you not to have to travel to DC to take advantage of this time to meet with members or their staff who come back to the district from DC during this time. And so also it being an election year, they also will be out of session in October, doing campaign work, working, just again, showing face in the district, taking meetings and being available to constituents. And so it's a really good opportunity for you to get a meeting with either the member or staff who represent this issue for the congressman to get in front of them and share your story and advocate on your policy positions. And so I think, we want to talk about what to expect, kind of how to get there for you. So again, you can always, you're going to want to do what you're most comfortable with. And so if you're not comfortable taking a face-to-face meeting with someone, go ahead and take the first step of advocacy can just be submitting an online comment to the member that, hey, my loved one is suffering from heart failure. This is some policy priorities that I think would benefit us, and submit that. Be ready to share your contact information, whether it be your mailing address, email address, phone number. Most offices try to make it a priority to respond. You might not always agree with that response, but again, their job as representing you is to have that conversation. And so feel free to make that small step of just submitting a comment. Moving up the pyramid, feel free to give a call, talk to the staffer. Most of the time when you do call in, it's going to be a staff assistant or an intern. So don't get upset that, the member of Congress answered the phone. Their days are pretty much scheduled from beginning to end. But again, leave the message with the staffer, provide your contact information, and don't be surprised if you do get a response in some form. The next step up would be an in-district staff meeting. And so requesting a meeting from a staffer in the district and say, hey, I would love to sit down with you for 20, 30 minutes and just introduce myself, build that relationship, have a conversation about your story, and provide the policy priorities that will most benefit you. And we can work on those priorities later on, but that would be the next step up. So if you're comfortable doing an in-person meeting, go ahead and request that. The top of the pyramid will be an actual meeting with the member of Congress. That is, while unlikely, it can and does happen. And so again, I think the thing you want to think about is that the member of Congress that you're meeting with is a normal average person. I mean, I know it can be, scary to go meet with this individual who, works in Washington, is a representative. But at the end of the day, I mean, it's more likely that they're your neighbor or a member of your church congregation. They are just an average Joe on the street. And so once you get that meeting down, depending on what kind of meeting you've got, you want to dress for the occasion. If you have Mended Hearts swag, I recommend wearing that. If you've got a shirt, a name tag, lanyard from a previous advocacy campaign that you worked on, socks are a pretty big thing these days. But anything branded with Mended Hearts, you're going to want to take in with the meeting just to kind of show some pride. And then if you are meeting with a member or staff, business casual is typically the attire to wear. Kind of, a Sunday church outfit is good. You don't necessarily need to wear a suit and tie unless, you're going to be in DC. That's a little bit different, but the in-person district meetings are very casual and should be very relaxed. And so in terms of etiquette, I think, y'all are probably pretty good on this, but show up on time, be polite and respectful. The staff aren't going to understand every single nuance of the policy position that you're going to have a discussion with them. And that's why you're there. You're there to educate them. You're there to, have that conversation and be a resource for them because they can't know everything. I wish I knew everything when I was on the Hill, but the reality is that's not how it works. So we rely heavily on folks like you to come in and tell us what the issues are. And so that goes to, being a resource for the staff member, building that relationship. You want to be top of mind when a heart policy comes across someone's desk for that staffer to say, hey, John has talked to me 3 times this year about this. I'm wondering if he now knows more about this heart policy and how it would affect him and the folks he knows. And so, you want to be that resource for the office. And then at the end, follow up 2 weeks down the road, offer answering any following questions, and then be ready for a potential photo op if you are meeting with a member of Congress.
Thanks, Ryan. Yeah, I think this is really meant to tie in pretty well with your kind of last statement there. Staff are crunched for time. They're not going to know every issue under the sun. Your average staffer, especially on the House side, is covering dozens and dozens of issues and probably meeting with dozens and dozens of organizations every single day. So, to that extent, it's important to have a really clear and concise message when you do get this very limited time with staffers. So, the text to the right, again, we're using the Safe Step Act here, but this is really meant to serve as a template for if you're submitting, a formal request or a formal correspondence to a member's online website, or you could even use it as sort of as a script for if you call an office. But I think, this is the part of the advocacy campaign when you're crafting your message where it's really important to use those stories that, especially the 2 Johns mentioned earlier before. I mean, those are the types of stories that have real impact with staff, with members of Congress, if you get the opportunity to meet with them in the district. So those are really valuable. You should talk about those whenever you can, while also, keeping the broader picture of why you're advocating and keeping that message concise and tailored in mind. So, I'll pause there to see if anybody has any questions there, because I know we're kind of coming up in our time, but we do have just one more slide at the end.
Yeah, can I ask? Can you
Sure.
see me?
Yep.
Okay, great. So I'm one of the few people that have mentioned that we've never advocated before. So I feel like this is leapfrogging to a little bit farther down to my understanding. So to advocate, we have to have knowledge of an existing policy, or is there any way to, in speaking out to a representative, of starting to build a policy or establish that? Or is that just way down the road?
No.
So I wouldn't even know where to start with that.
Yeah,
Would you guys like for me to start the response for this one?
Yeah, go ahead, Lindsay.
Okay. So this was our test case. Today was the get around the table, hear from you what your experience level is, knowing that some of you have done this before versus some of you have not done this before. The timing is really designed because we're in election year, as Ryan described. If there was a chance to talk about legislation, if you had the desire, you care about a bill, you've lobbied on a bill before that's been introduced in the past that Mended Hearts may have guided you through, this could be your chance to take that leap and potentially set up a meeting in the district office in your local hometown, or potentially reach out and join a teletown hall, a video town hall, an in-person town hall. It really was meant to see where everybody stood with their level of knowledge. However, yes, that's exactly what we exist for. What we will be doing 50-50 with us and the Mended Hearts team is designing the priorities based on your feedback, your experience, the legislation that we see moving, working with other organizations in the heart health space, and picking a priority. Because one thing we do know as former staffers and now advocacy professionals is dozens and dozens and hundreds and even thousands of bills are introduced. If you're asking for everything under the sun, what does that do? It waters down your ability to really concentrate on what matters, what has a chance of passing, what affects the majority of our membership and of our advocates. So we're getting to know you. It's a little bit of a dance and figuring that out, Nova, but I really appreciate you saying that, because that really, when we came up with this idea to do the training session right away, that was our biggest point of, well, are people going to feel like they don't even know what to talk about? Are we putting the cart before the horse? Well, not exactly, because now you have the tools. You'll have access to this presentation and information. We'll revisit this again, and we might even be able to do it when we actually have 2 or 3 bills that we agree are the best legislation to move forward for a fly-in, or for if you decide, I want to work on this legislation, I read something about it, what do we know about it? Can I go meet with my member of Congress? So a little bit of a multi-pronged answer for you, but at the same time, this is a great way for you to start thinking about bills that might impact you and letting us help you learn more about that legislation. Chris and Ryan, do you want to add on quickly anything else to that response?
I don't think so. I mean, I think it's all about, even without a policy priority, it's about building that relationship and just being seen. And so once we do have our policy priorities, it will be easier to take a meeting, and we'll work hand in hand with you to have those talking points prepared. But it's not a bad idea just to have a 2-minute conversation with a staffer and just get on the radar.
Is there a way to find out what bills are in existence right now, what policies are being discussed that have to do with heart health, so we can at least have that kind of jumping off platform?
There is. I know that we plan on working with y'all to provide an August update. And so we are going to do a symposium mid-August to provide an update on those policy priorities. And so that might be sort of like a wait and see, and join us on that to really get the deep dive on the legislation that we are prioritizing.
Okay, appreciate it.
Congress.
Yeah, Nova, I can understand probably what you're getting at. I mean, it can be really difficult to, find what bills are, being considered by Congress and committees and stuff. To put it bluntly, sometimes it's just like Googling, hey, are there any bills on XYZ,
Sure.
right? I mean, yeah,
If that's the best way to go, sure.
yeah. I mean, I can't think of a one-stop place where you can kind of just type in an issue and see where there's, activity. That's definitely where we come in. It's, hey, is there activity going on? That's something we track day in and day out. But we don't know what we don't know, right? We don't know where a member might be thinking about policy, or if there's some bill that hasn't come up in committee at all, but maybe a member has introduced something. So that's kind of a roundabout answer, but I can understand maybe your frustration there.
And this kind of leads us to our
Guess what? This next slide.
Yeah.
This part's too overwhelming. This part, we understand you. We don't ever want to speak like as if you cannot read legislation, interpret it, and figure out how it impacts you. We just know that can be a bit daunting for the average individual, including us when we started out as baby staffers, having to navigate how to read legislation. It doesn't matter what part's important, what references of former legislation, who are the sponsors, yada, yada. But if you look here, we could be able to break this down for you so you don't have to review in-depth bills. We do want you to read our notices and participate in the webinars to the degree that you're comfortable, and no question's a dumb question in this area.
Okay, great.
Chris, did you have any talking points on the bill slide?
Yeah, sorry. I didn't know if we were still. No, we really just wanted to provide this as sort of a final quick hit list of other bills that Mended Hearts is interested in. We use the Safe Step Act as an example throughout the presentation, but there are a number of bills that have been recently introduced or have seen activity recently in various committees in the Senate and on the House side. So this was really meant to be just a quick hit list. If you do find yourself reaching out to a congressional office in the next couple weeks or so, these are all really great examples to potentially talk to staff and members of Congress about. So that was sort of the point of this final slide here.
Actually, the Hearts Act was something I was involved with American Heart Association just back in May. So it's great to see that that's still on. Well, I guess it's
Yeah.
not passed. It's passed out of the House.
Passed out of the House
Great,
Energy
great.
and Commerce Committee, which means that it still needs a full vote on the House floor.
That's super. So that's simply getting AEDs in schools and
Right.
having a plan, having
Right.
the entire administration understanding the plan, because typically there's only one AED per school. And if there's a football game going on or a basketball game in another part of the building, they're not going to have access quick enough to
Yeah.
that AED.
If I recall correctly, that was another bill that just had a massive number of co-sponsors on it too.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it was all 100% support when
Yep.
I saw my legislators from North Carolina. It's great.
I'm sure it was a unanimous vote out of the Energy and Commerce Committee.
Great. Good to hear.
So Judson, you're basically volunteering as being a team leader, the first fly-in that we have.
Sure. I'm all about it. Yeah, whatever I can do.
That's great.
And I
Okay.
just quickly wanted to mention that presenting these 5 different legislative areas, we're keeping in mind that we've got 3 different programs: Mended Little Hearts, Mended Hearts, and Young Mended Hearts. And you all may be advocating, have different interests and different legislation you want to advocate on behalf of. So we just want you to know we're aware of that and very conscious of that.
Mandy, that's a great point. This is also meant to be a way for you to mix and match how you want to advocate on specific legislation and really do this stellarly when you're reaching out, and you don't have to have the same legislative interest as Judson or as Nova or as your neighbor down the street. You may have something that impacts you differently than that person, but we're really here to be able to coordinate that message together. And the staffers, what they do know is organizations like Mended Hearts and the American Heart Association don't have one singular bill they come in and lobby on or advocate on every year. So they expect to hear from different, varying groups that come from the organization. And they'll love to know that you're volunteering doing this. This is something you guys really, you deserve an applause, because this is your volunteer role, because it impacts you. And this is the core and crux of all of this. So I guess this is a great way to close out our slides, but also move into questions if you guys have any more or if something stood out to you. Also, 45 minutes heading into the end of the day is a long time for a lecture session, but hopefully you guys thought it was a lot of fun and you asked great questions throughout, and we appreciated the interjecting, because Chris, Ryan, and I hear ourselves drone on and on all the time. So this is a great way to make it conversational, because I think that's going to be the best way for you guys to feel more confident, comfortable, and excited about doing the work. And yes, I see Jamie has her hand up. Yay. Okay.
I'm Jamie Lee. I'm a heart mom in Austin, Texas. I'm an advocate professionally for associations, but also when I had my kiddo and he had CHDs, I jumped into heart advocacy. So I noticed some of the legislation have been in the works for a while. Could you remind us why things take so long going through Congress?
You're laughing because you know the answer to this. I'll take a little bit of it, and I think we have to acknowledge that it's been a very wild and bumpy ride politically and in our U.S. government. Our U.S. government did not start cleanly and clearly. It's always been a little disruptive and challenging, but in recent years, it's been especially challenging. I will say this might be a whole nother session for a whole nother day, but right now we're looking at unprecedented margins of how many Republicans and how many Democrats are in Congress, and the partisan nature of how legislation moves through Congress. So whether your bill is the greatest bill in the whole wide world, it saves every kitty cat on the planet, there is going to be challenge. Somebody's going to raise their hand and say, I don't like it because of this. And that is getting more and more prevalent, especially with the internet being so accessible, Twitter, social media platforms. So I will say there's a bigger philosophical challenge politically, but at the same time, you hear the adage about sausage making, and that's something that's existed for a long time. At the federal level, these bills move very slowly. They have to go through committee, they have to go through subcommittee, they have to get marked up, they get changed, they get presented to the floor, they go to the rules committee, and so on and so forth. And they have to be considered in an election year. A lot of times legislation, I'll caveat what I'm saying by saying that even though you might feel like your legislation is not getting considered, you are actually the voters that your representatives want to target because you're the passionate ones that are out there paying attention. So legislation like heart health related bills that are typically very bipartisan are ones that members of Congress want to go back and brag about. I hope that you get to go meet with your member of Congress and they say, oh, I'm a sponsor of that bill because I care about it, because they know you're a voter and they want you to reelect them. And they see that you see that they are supporting the effort and ideas that you're bringing to the table. So I hope that's helpful, but it doesn't explain or justify the reason for moving very little legislation. There are some bills and must pass things that have to go through. And I will say the appropriations process is critical to the funding that goes through the Health and Human Services agency that help fund a lot of these programs. So I will keep that, high point for tracking and trusting that they are trying to move legislation because they have to. It's their job to appropriate funding for the federal agencies, if that's helpful. We'll get more and more into this, we promise, but it is frustrating at times, but it's part of the process and we need you to push it forward. So Chris, I see you nodding. Did you want to add to that?
You covered it really well. I was just going to add that, as we mentioned during the presentation, there are literally thousands of bills that get introduced. And a lot of these are small single issue bills, especially the ones that we just listed on the last slide there. They're important, but they're a very niche issue. And in a lot of cases, it takes a much larger package to move through Congress, as Lindsay was kind of just saying, to get a lot of those introduced. So, at some point, maybe Congress will take up a large health care related package, and a lot of these smaller niche bills will get attached to that and pass through Congress. So, you can imagine if the House of Representatives has to vote 100 times a day on these little tiny bills, that takes up a lot of time. So sometimes it just takes, these bigger packages to move their way through Congress to get some of these addressed.
Thank you, Chris. Let's get Deidre in here. I know she has her hand up.
Hi, you guys know, I just wanted to say thank you so much. Thank you, Mandy, and your whole entire team. This is information that I definitely needed and look forward to reviewing on the slides, especially the one about the bill searcher. But even the snapshot that you gave at the end was truly helpful. So I just want to commend you guys and say, keep going and keep me posted on the meetings and the notes, because there are people out there like me who have a big mouth that don't mind speaking up. This is the information that we need to be empowered with. So thank you.
Thank you.
Love that. Thank you so much.
Any other questions? I don't see anything else in the chat. Well, oh, Troutman team, thank you all for your knowledge and your time today. We're so grateful. And to everyone who took time out of your day, we're really appreciative of you being here. And we can't wait. We're really excited to continue this work throughout the rest of the year and into 2025. So keep an eye on your inboxes for more info to come, and we'll see you soon.